And I looked at him and I said, so, it sounds like this might be helpful for cancer. Is that true? And he looks at me and pregnancy cures cancer. And I was just like, I'm a fairly talkative person. I had nothing to say. I just started crying.
Wow.
And I talked to him later and realized and found out that he was a specialist and had seen this happen before. But like the way he directly, it was just like,
wow.
But I just felt like God was saying, I've got this. Fast forward a month before the birth of the baby, the lump was gone. Couldn't find it. Couldn't feel
Golf ball size lump.
Yes. The body had detoxed the whole thing.
Welcome to the Natural Health Matters podcast, where I want to help you look and feel your best at any age. I'm your host, David Sandstrom, and this is episode number 126. Hey, before we get started today, I'd like you to know that I want to get to know my audience better, and I would enjoy having a one-on-one conversation with you about 10 minutes over Zoom. If you'd be interested in that, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/coffee talk, and you can pick a date and a time and schedule a 10-minute Zoom call with me one-on-one. I look forward to hearing from you. Today we have on the show Katrina Foe. Katrina is board certified in holistic nutrition and is the founder of Design for Health. She's also the author of the book Nutritional Pilates. After overcoming her own cancer 100% naturally, she now specializes in teaching people to take control of their health by helping their bodies to heal themselves. Katrina, welcome to Natural Health Matters.
Oh, thank you, David. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on. I was doing some homework on you and listening to some of the podcasts you did, and I can tell that we're very like-minded. And I know that you're a follower of Jesus Christ and you believe in treating the whole person, spirit, mind, and body. So I think we're going to have a lot to talk about. But what I really want to do today is address the idea of, well, if I'm going to embrace health, if I'm going to take more control of my health, it's good to ask a few questions. So I want the listeners, the Natural Nation, to know that when you're making that transition from the medical model or the medical paradigm, and you're trying to learn more about natural and holistic health, it's a great thing to ask questions. Would you agree with that?
I do. I am passionate about asking questions, and this was a key part of my cancer journey. I actually got in trouble for asking too many questions. But, whether, you're just talking to a MD or a natural-minded practitioner, like you want to really own your health. And the only way to do that is to really start asking questions specifically so that you understand why you're doing what you're doing and what are the implications, what are the consequences and such, so that you know what you're getting into and you know what you're responsible for.
Yeah, absolutely. Ultimately, we're responsible for our health, right? It's not the practitioner, it's not the doctor, it's us and God, right? And, of course, God designed our bodies with the ability to heal. But, before we get into that, I'd like to know, what was it like to get a cancer diagnosis? I mean, you're a young gal, and that must have been, a scary time. I'd love to hear what that was like for you.
Absolutely. So I was 37 at the time. I had just had my fifth baby and was nursing him. He was about a year old at that point. And I had a mastitis. Now, with 5 babies, I had had several plugged ducts and such, and knew what to do. I had my routine. And as that resolved, I noticed that the golf ball size lump didn't go away. And honestly, I didn't think much of it. I'm like, whatever, I'm nursing, the breast tissue shifts and changes and such. But my mom, out of the blue, just pops out with this like really obsessive, like, what's going on? You have to figure this out. And I'm like, and she starts telling me how my grandmother had had a double mastectomy when she was in college, when my mother was in college. Now, I had never met my grandmother because she passed away when my mom was pregnant with me, but I had never heard about this. And I asked my mom, like, so did she have cancer? And she didn't know. And I'm like, this is so strange.
Wow.
How do you not know if your mother had cancer? She's like, well, we didn't talk about that then. She's like, but I have to assume she did, because why else would they do a double mastectomy?
Yeah.
So she was very concerned about it. And when I got things checked out, it did come back as cancerous. And, it was scary. Very much so. It was confusing. It was overwhelming. I didn't have the emotional support maybe I thought I would have had. And of course, my children were very young. They had no idea what was going on with mom. They didn't know, and we didn't want to scare them or anything, but
Right.
going through the process of like, we had already been on some health journeys and done a lot of work where, we were doing all the right things, eating healthy, clean, organic from scratch. Like we had literally gone to the extreme of moving up to Idaho so that we could raise our own cattle and chickens and have clean sourced meat. I mean, that's a little
that's awesome.
extreme. So the
Not in
whole
my
thing
mind. I
just,
think that's great.
but but on that note, it's kind of a weird thing. Like when you look at somebody that's doing all that stuff, you don't think, oh, that's the person that's going to get cancer at 37 years old.
Right. Yeah.
So this just flipped everything that I was thinking I was doing the right things on its head. And I just started out asking questions. I'm like, what am I doing? Because something is not right. What am I doing that's not right? And let's put everything back on the table. I'm not going to assume that, this sacred cow, so to speak, is okay. I'm going to put it all out there. And so it took a lot of reading, a lot of questioning to really start to come back around to figure out what was not right for me. And that was a hard journey, but it took a lot of questions like you were talking about.
Yeah. I want to get into some of those questions now. I know that you went to a cancer clinic and you got thrown out. So can you tell us about that?
I know. So shocking. So we were doing more of a Weston Price Gaps kind of a diet when I got cancer.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clean, pretty good. And I'm like, well,
that's right. Yeah.
Meat. All this stuff I was looking at on the internet was saying that meat was bad and evil and I need to go plant-based, raw, vegan. And so I'm like, okay, I will be open, even though I have my prejudices and I've already done some of this research. Maybe I didn't look at both sides of the argument well enough. And a friend had told me about Gerson clinics. So I'm like, let's do that. And even though I wasn't doing standard of care, I felt an urgency. Like I have to do something yesterday.
Right.
So I rushed down there. My mom went with me and, I'd read the books about Gerson, but I had a lot of questions. There were a lot of things that didn't jive with what I had already learned on our health stuff. Why can't you eat any salt? Like none. Why can't you eat any fat? Like fat and salt are kind of important. Why is the list of supplements the same for everybody? And why aren't you testing my thyroid before you give me thyroid supplements and supports?
Yeah.
And I started asking the people there, and either they couldn't speak enough English to help me, or they told me to read the books, which I'd already done, and the answers weren't in there, but they couldn't answer my questions.
Yeah. Wow.
So
that's a red flag.
Yeah, right? I mean, how am I supposed to get healing if I don't even know what I'm doing? I need to make sure that if I'm going to go do these weird stuff, that I'm putting all my eggs in the right basket. So by the third day, the director of the facility comes and sits me down and wants to have a private conversation with me, which immediately I feel like I'm in trouble. And he tells me, he's looking at me all stern, like, my staff has been telling me that you've been asking a lot of questions, Katrina. I think you just need to trust in the process.
Wow.
I mean, I could feel myself just like the adrenaline pumping of like, so misunderstood, so confused.
Right.
And I asked him, like, how am I supposed to just trust in the process if I don't know that this is the right process for me? And if you can't answer my questions.
Yeah.
And so he said, this is not the right place for you. You need to leave.
Wow. Man, that is so surprising. I really thought that, an alternative cancer clinic would be a little bit more open-minded than that. But, well, I'm assuming you left.
I did. Here's the funny part. So they were actually that weekend while I was there filming a documentary, a very well-known cancer documentary at the facility. And he was actually, I found several months later when it aired, talking about me on the documentary hours before he kicked me out.
Wow.
I mean, it was just, the whole thing was insane. I'm like, wait a second.
Really strange.
Where's the love? Where's the, I want to help you from my heart,
compassion, Yeah. The individualized care. Yeah. All the things that you needed at that point in time. Yeah. Well, that kind of brings up the first question that I wanted the audience to be aware of is, if you're dealing with a serious health challenge, the first question to really ask is, do I need a doctor or do I need a health advocate? So you had to go through that. So I'm sure you talked with some medical doctors. They made your diagnosis, correct? So,
Yeah.
so you asked yourself that question. How did that go?
Yeah, I saw lots of different practitioners.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, I was the one that had to kind of piecemeal things together, which is why I do the work I do now, because that was not easy. It was not fun. And now, fast forward to today, there's even more information out there that makes it more overwhelming and confusing for people
Yeah.
that are trying to figure things out. But yeah, I
Hmm.
think you need all of those. You need medical
Yeah.
doctors, you need natural practitioners, you need health advocates and coaches. You
Hmm.
need a team of people. And most importantly, I think you really need good family support. That is just super essential.
Yeah. Well, I often say this on the podcast, and regular listeners will know this, but allopathic medicine, what you get, the Western style medical care that you get from a doctor, an MD or a DO, that style of healthcare is great for acute conditions and emergencies. They're fantastic with that. You get busted up in a car accident, man, roll me into the nearest emergency room, give me all the drugs and surgery you need to save my life. Perfectly appropriate use of that style of healthcare. But with chronic health challenges, that style of healthcare kind of loses its luster. And that's when we have to start looking more at the natural and holistic approaches, and where we're cooperating with God's design for hopefully spirit, mind, and body, the whole person. And that is, in my experience, been far more effective in dealing with long-term or chronic health conditions.
Oh, you are speaking my language. Absolutely. Like with the chronic disease, unfortunately, the majority of our Western practitioners, the allopathic model, they're looking to symptom treat and
Right.
just put a band aid on it. And that does
Yeah.
not prevent or stop anything. So, yeah, you may have shut down yourself from feeling that symptom, but the disease process is still going on. And you're just going to see
Right.
something bigger later that's linked that you could have prevented if you listened to your body at the beginning.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Well, that kind of leads us right into the second question that I would recommend people ask, and that is, why do I have this health challenge? What's the root cause of what was going on? What was that like for you? What did you discover during that process?
So for me, I had never heard of functional medicine at that point. I had never done any testing, and I found a functional practitioner, and we started testing all the stuff that I didn't even know you could test. And I was just blown away by the amazing tests we have. And fast forward today, we have even more amazing tests that I we have expanded out into. But this just really drew my attention into the fact that even though I didn't really feel what was going on, a lot of the things that were off in my body, you could see really clearly in the lab testing.
Mm,
And as soon as I knew, I could start to understand of like, oh, that's what that, brain fog is. And that's what the, it
hmm
started to connect in, but I was so disconnected from understanding what was going on with my body that it took the lab test to really show me what I couldn't hear.
Yeah, yeah, very good. So you got with a functional practitioner, and that's when you started connecting the dots, so to speak, on the path that you believed you should be going down.
Absolutely. And this is where it
Hmm.
gets a little weird. So I had, insulin resistance, estrogen dominance, hypothyroid, like my vitamin D levels were in the toilet.
Mm,
I, had super high levels of toxic mold. I had a very toxic relationship. Like all these different things together created this perfect storm to
hmm
throw my body out. And a lot of people, when they're looking for why did this disease and cancer in this area happen to me, they're looking for one thing. And it's not going to be one thing when we're talking about chronic diseases like cancer. It's going to be like 6 to 8 out of the 10 terrain buckets that are going to be
Right.
off. And so you want to make sure, my preference is to make sure I get all the smoking guns on the table at the beginning. I want to
Hmm.
know what I'm dealing with so we can prioritize and make it a little softer, gentler process to, work on some of these areas.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you're. It's like you've read my notes here. You're reading my mind. But my next question was the question number three would be, what health blocking factors do I need to eliminate? So you just named a few. You had vitamin D deficiency. You had hypothyroid. So you identified some of these things that were impeding your health. And of course, then question 4 would be, what health enhancing factors can I work into my life? Right. And, if we can do more of getting outdoors, getting some sunlight on our skin, natural vitamin D production, maybe it's exercise, maybe it's relationships, so that's really the natural approach to health. And the natural practitioner, their job is to help you identify those health blocking factors and help you eliminate them, hopefully, and then identify the health enhancing factors that will apply to you that you need to do. And then we let these magnificent bodies that God gave us do their thing, right? And I call that vitalism. And that is that the body knows how to heal. It knows how to thrive. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. Yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. I love how you put that because, I tell my clients all the time, like, I don't cure cancer. We are going to help figure out what is blocking you, what are you deficient in and is not working, and supply that to your body and unblock you. And then your body can do it itself. Your body is going to heal the cancer. And that's such a different mindset. And if you don't have God in your life, I think it sounds maybe a little crazy, but the body is so beautifully designed with its backup systems and its just instinctive understanding of what needs to be prioritized. I have to explain to my clients all the time, okay, I'm going to give you this magnesium and you're going to put it in your mouth and you're taking it. But, I may be giving you the magnesium to help support your detox processes. Your body knows what's going on better than I ever could. And it's going to prioritize, no, I don't really need the magnesium for that as much as I need it for this.
Right. And it knows what to do with the magnesium.
It's a beautiful thing. And it makes our job as practitioners so much easier. In terms of how I look at, the whole body health, I love how you picked up on for the individual, what they need, because that's the key thing. When you're talking about addressing a chronic disease naturally, it's very important to realize and understand that there's like a million things you can do, and you listed a couple good ones, but there's so many. And it literally can be a full-time job and cost you a fortune and still not be what you need if it's not zoomed in. And so this is where I really am excited about the functional testing to see what is it for you. That way the client can prioritize, like, this is important for me. Like, I have genetic issues. I don't absorb the light well. And it took me several different forms of vitamin D to actually find one that my body could absorb and utilize. So being outside, it's great. Is that the best use of my time? If I'm not going to absorb it anyways, not really. Now, but that's not the same for everybody. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
Stress was a big driver for me. I needed to get that under control. And until that got under control, that wasn't going to be something that really shifted a lot. So you can determine what are going to be the areas that can move things faster with less effort and less cost and less time and all that kind of thing.
And that usually involves, obviously a lengthy conversation, but usually involves some lab work.
Yeah, it involves the health history, the discussion, the lab work, like all the stuff.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully considering the whole person. I address this in my book, The Christian's Guide to Holistic Health, and that is, if you have a problem with anger, and that is chronically activating your stress response, you can switch to 100% organic food tomorrow, and it's not going to you're not going to move the needle on your health. Right? You're going to deal with the anger, right? Because we're more than, human beings are more than just a body. We are a spirit. We have a mind and we live in a body. And I love this verse here that kind of speaks to that. It's Genesis 2, chapter 2, verse 7. It's right there in the beginning of the Bible. Then the Lord God formed the man from the dust of the ground. So there's our bodies. And he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. And that word for breath is spirit. And the man became a living being. And that word for being is mind. So God created us body and spirit, and then he gives us a mind that connects the two together. And now you have a whole human being. And if we have a serious health challenge, as you did, and if we don't address all three parts to who and what we are, we might be really missing the mark. We might see very minimal progress if we address the physical alone, which, by the way, is very common in the medical community, but also in the natural health community as well. There are people that believe they're holistic, but what they really are is natural. And they're not holistic because they all but ignore the spiritual and the mental emotional aspects to a human being.
Oh, yes. And that is one of the areas that I'm so passionate about, because that's one of the 10 root cause drivers is the mental emotional component. And that's the area that I always, beat the drum of like, this is something you need to not ignore. Because, usually in the year prior to a cancer diagnosis, there's something that has deeply hurt the cancer client's heart. Some kind of trauma. That could be loss of a job. It could be loss of a child, a relationship. It could be anything. And I've seen quite the spectrum of that, but it's something specific to them. And it's very easy to be like, no, let's look at the chemical, let's look at the, mechanical issues and not look at the spiritual aspect. And that gets brushed aside in most of our medical models, no matter what they are. And while I'm not a counselor, that's not like my treatment aspect. I think it's very important to flush it out, bring it to the client's attention, and give them options and tools to deal with that so that they can, whether they want to journal, pray, talk therapy, some different energetic work. There's a lot of different things that are very effective and they can work at it. And this is, again, an example of how great God is, that he's given us different modalities to work at it and to address the issues that are all effective. You just have to make sure you do something. You can't ignore it because it will come back. And I've seen that with clients. They just ignore that one piece. And then they don't really fully get in remission, or they don't, stay in remission because they're not acknowledging that they are body, mind, and spirit.
Yeah. My wife and I have been leading marriage groups for the last 11 years. And one of the things we go kind of deep into is, what was going on in your home when you were 12, 13, 14 years old? And we've heard some really horrific stories about what people have been through. But most adults will say, well, that was a long time ago. I'm over that. Are you really? This might be a topic worth exploring, especially, for your relational connectedness for sure, but especially for dealing with a serious health challenge. These things are worth talking about. You can't separate those things from your physical outcomes. It's all interconnected, and all three parts are interdependent. And that's just the way God made us. I'm curious, Katrina, you mentioned prayer. I'm assuming that you spent some time in prayer after your diagnosis. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I did. I was angry and frustrated.
Yeah.
But I was grounded enough at that point. Sorry, thinking about that frustration just brings it all back. I was grounded enough in my relationship with the Lord at that point that it wasn't like I was walking away. I was just like, what the heck? Here's where the story gets kind of interesting. So I'd been kicked out of the cancer clinic. I found my functional path, and I was feeling pretty good. I'm like, I got this. And it's almost like God was like, no. I've got something different. This is not you. This is me. And I went to a marriage retreat, which is so funny you bring that up.
Oh, wow.
I'm sorry. No, it wasn't a marriage retreat. It was just a women's retreat, but marriage was on my mind because we were having problems. And I went there, even though I was thinking like, it was a huge spiritual struggle because I'm like, they're going to be eating crappy food. Like, I'm not going to get good sleep, like all this stuff. I'm like, no, I really felt like I needed to go. And the whole time at every breakout session, when they gave us quiet time, it was just like heavy on my heart that I needed to go home on Sunday night and be with my husband in the biblical sense.
Wow.
Yeah. Who does that happen to? It was so strange. And I kind of argued with God. And I'm like, hey, by the way, I just redid my hormone test. Like, I know what time of the month that is. I don't think that's a good idea. And hey, by the way, did you know I have cancer, God? Like, this is not the time to get pregnant. How about Monday? Yeah. Can we do it on Monday? And it was like, no, it's Sunday night. So long story short, I was obedient and got pregnant with my 6th child.
Wow.
Which, like, let me just tell you, people were pissed when I told them I was doing cancer, addressing it naturally. When I told them I was pregnant, like, it's a whole nother level.
Yeah.
And I'm super grateful that at that point I'd already kind of shut out and guarded myself from the negativity, but it was hard. And I was just kind of free falling, like, what are you doing, God? So we went to a conference, a health conference, just to, it was actually our anniversary. Like, I just need to get out of here and just, And I was waiting for my husband after a session, and I was talking to this guy, and he had these magnetic bed pads. I'm like, so how would this work with pregnancy? Is this safe during pregnancy? And he's like, yeah, this is totally safe. It's kind of our at-home model. It's very, mild. And then I looked at him and I said, so, it sounds like this might be helpful for cancer. Is that true? And he looks at me and pregnancy cures cancer. And I was just like, I'm a fairly talkative person. I had nothing to say. I just started crying.
Wow.
And I talked to him later and realized and found out that he was a specialist and had seen this happen before. But like the way he directly, it was just like,
wow.
But I just felt like God was saying, I've got this.
I got chills. That's a great story.
It was crazy, but I've heard from several other alternative cancer practitioners that they have seen this. So I felt like, okay, this isn't insane. Fast forward a month before the birth of the baby, the lump was gone. Couldn't find it. Couldn't feel it.
Golf ball size lump.
Yes.
Wow.
The body had detoxed the whole thing. And I just have to tell you, this was not from my clean eating, because I have hyperemesis gravidarum with every pregnancy and get nothing good in. It was not from the supplements, because there were only like 3 of the supplements I was able to still take while I was pregnant. I wasn't doing the detox work. I wasn't doing the stuff I should be doing. And it was very interesting to me. I feel like I kind of cheated there in a way. But here's where it gets really, really interesting, in my opinion. So fast forward again, a year later, I nursed the baby for a year and I decided to wean him. And I circled back to my functional practitioner and said, okay, like I didn't finish the work that I was doing. I'm ready to finish it. I, nurse the baby, help me out. And she said, read the book Fat for Fuel by Mercola. And she also pointed me towards Dr. Nasha Winter's book, The Metabolic Approach to Cancer. Well, I looked at that. I'm like, okay, no. Ketogenic, that's like dangerous. You're eliminating whole food groups. Like this is not the right way. She's like, Katrina, read it. So I read it and the science was there. This like resonated with me. It made sense. And so before I even finished Fat for Fuel, I was on the ketogenic diet. And what I didn't mention was that when I was a teenager, I was diagnosed with bipolar. I was on heavy meds for many years and did not like the way they made me feel. It didn't fix the problem. And I had weaned myself off and had been white knuckling it for about 2 decades.
Wow.
So the ketogenic diet, I started feeling better mentally. And it was really interesting because it was around Thanksgiving and my husband was doing like a family worship about like being joyful in all circumstances. And he was talking about giving the example of some neighbors who had lost their house in a fire and how the community had gathered around and rebuilt their house and how it had been like such a blessing and drawn them close to the Lord and all this stuff. And my little daughter had popped in and she goes, well, like mom's cancer, Dad. And we both kind of looked at her and he goes, well, what do you mean, honey? And she goes, well, if mom hadn't had cancer, she wouldn't have tried keto. And now she's happy.
Wow. That's really cool.
So like the whole thing, the whole process, it sucked. It wasn't fun, but it was answering a prayer request of over 20 years.
Wow.
And it wouldn't change it for the world.
When you first told me about getting pregnant when you had the cancer diagnosis, the first thing that came to my mind was we have 4 children, and my wife did great pregnant. She was glowing. Her skin was literally, her eyes were brighter, her skin was glowing, her hair was so shiny, and everything about her physically was just great. And I was thinking to myself, as you were sharing that story, is that I'll bet pregnancy was probably beneficial. That's exactly what I was thinking, and because it can be that way. Now, there's women who have a hard time with pregnancy. Let's face it, that does happen. But apparently, you weren't one of them, and that's great. God bless that. I mean, that is just really, really cool.
It was pretty extreme. I had to we were cooking food outside in the crock pot because of the smells, and I literally would go days without eating. But looking back in hindsight, it was very interesting because I also get anemic. And I was at a really all-time low, single digits ferritin and iron and such, with famous doctors telling me I still wasn't anemic, but I understand more the ferroptosis, so there might have been something going on with that. Definitely with all the not eating, I was in a ketogenic state. So there were some interesting things that might have been happening as my questioning brain tries to figure out like what happened there.
Mm-hmm.
But either which way, I think God was just giving me the perfectionistic tendencies. Like, this was not you. This was me, and I have a bigger plan.
Wow. That's really great. That is so cool. I want to say a couple other things too, and that is Mercola's book, Fat for Fuel. I read it too. It's not an easy read. That's not a light read. And you got through it. That's fantastic, and it's very scientific, and it's actually not pure keto, is it? Because he recommends cycling in and out of the ketogenic state, right?
Well, yes, and the cycling in and out would be post cancer when you're in remission. So okay. I was not cycling in and out at that point. Okay. I now, quite a few years later, have other tools. I've seen so much that ketogenic is amazing for mental health. So I've seen it in lots of other segments. And I've also got some other tools with some lithium orotate and stuff so that I can cycle out. And I've been in remission with the bipolar for, a very long time now, which is such a blessing. And I would love to get that out there because honestly, like I would rather, die of cancer than suffer with the bipolar.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That's really cool. Well, praise God that you're doing so well. That's really great. Yeah. I was going to mention that as well, is that the ketogenic diet has been used many years ago, a long time before Atkins and before any of that. It's like back in, I think it was like the 1940s and 50s, I think they were using it for schizophrenia and also for seizures, epilepsy. Yep. And, and then now it's gained popularity over the last, decade or 15 years or so. But it's been around for a long, long time. It's not so out there as people might think. It really isn't because.
No, it's not at all. But it's very counter to what a lot of people are saying is good for cancer in terms of like what I mentioned at the beginning with the Gerson, with the raw vegan stuff. And especially in terms of the juicing, the obsessive juicing with cancer. Like that is the worst idea for blood sugar dysregulation that you could have. And with cancer, we know, and again, this is Otto Warburg's Nobel Prize winning work from the 1931, I think, that cancer is a metabolic disease. That's the hallmark indicator that a cancer cell is a cancer cell, is that there's a shift metabolically, that it needs insane amounts of glucose and burns things differently. Right. But yet, why are they not talking about that in oncology? Why do they not tell people like, hey, no more carbs?
It's hard to figure out, when they are doing a PET scan to detect cancer, they give you a high sugar drink. They give you a high glucose drink, and then it goes through your body, and the cancer cells light up because they're feeding on that sugar, and that's how they detect cancer. But my mother-in-law died from breast cancer, and her doctors they literally told her, make sure you eat plenty of chocolate chip cookies and cake because you need to keep your weight on.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned this, David, because this is the worst part. You hear that all the time because they're worried about cachexia. Because most cancer clients don't actually die of the cancer. They die of cachexia, where they waste away and they have that skeleton ending, which is just horrible. Well, here's the thing. Carbs will speed that process up. And you know what will actually slow it down and stop it? It's ketogenic diet.
Keto.
Yeah. And it seems so bizarre that eating lots of fat and no carbs is going to make you, not lose weight. Because so often today we hear about ketogenic for weight loss, but it's not just for weight loss. It's for stability and bringing people back into that center place. So, I have clients that were underweight that we got their weight up with ketogenic too. And on that note, I just want to throw this out there. I know you know this, but for listeners, you guys probably know too, but I'm not talking about the Velveeta ketogenic version. I'm talking about like clean ketogenic.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if I've really talked a whole lot about keto on the podcast. I'm going to be doing some more episodes on nutrition, but for those that don't know, ketogenic is about getting a lot more fat, good quality fats in your diet, low to no sugar, low to no carbohydrate, and moderate protein. That's a ketogenic diet. And it has just really, really powerful, dramatic effects on some people. Probably not going to work for everyone. There is no such thing as one size fits all, but it's something worth exploring if you're dealing with a health challenge, for sure. Is
I'm going to say, I want to jump on that. I totally
sure.
agree with you. There is no one size fits all. But what I
Hmm.
have found, because I have a lot of clients that come to me that have already done the reading, and they've tried ketogenic, and a lot of times there's easy tweaks to help it really take off for them. So I'm just going to give you some tips here. So one, the electrolytes in the transition, the body, when they don't have the insulin, it's going to dump the salt. And you need to make sure you replenish
Right.
that. Otherwise, you just feel awful. And that's what people talk
Right.
about with the keto flu. The
Right.
other thing is that so many people, which I'm sure you're aware of, like they can't digest their fats. They have gallbladder issues and just not good at it because they've eaten low fat for so many years. Like that was
Yeah.
me. And so when they don't digest their fat well, and you're eating 80% fat, becomes an even bigger problem.
Right.
So, the doctors say just don't eat a lot of fat, eat low fat diet. Well, yeah, that kind of fixes that problem, but then you don't get all the fat and you can't do a ketogenic diet like that. So,
Hmm.
shoring the fat digestion up can alleviate the nausea and discomfort that usually is what people are saying that, like, I know it doesn't work for me.
Hmm. I got you. Yeah. So they're not getting through that phase very well because they're primarily lacking electrolytes. And there's also metabolic individuality that comes into play there. We're running out of
Very
time.
good.
That's going to have to be in a me. I'll have you back on. We'll talk about that in maybe
Yeah.
another episode. But so we're coming up on the end of today's conversation. But I'd love to know what's the thing that you would like people to remember most about what we talked about today.
Oh, that's a great one. I would say test, don't guess.
Okay.
So many people that are out there doing natural stuff. I'm being totally vague on purpose. There's all the cool stuff, the IV vitamin C and the hyperbaric oxygen, and
Hmm.
it sounds sexy and people are selling it really well, but it depends on your drivers and what is specifically an issue for you as to what is going to be a good investment of your time and your money and energy. And there's actually periods where people will go in and out of being too oxidative and such, where like things like IV vitamin C are actually working against them. So that's a
Hmm.
very oxidative therapy, which sounds counter because you think of vitamin C being antioxidant, but in those high doses it's oxidative. And there's a simple G6PD that you can test, and if it's elevated, like do not give that person IV vitamin C. But people aren't doing this testing, and it's
Hmm.
really important to make sure that we're focused with the testing to make sure we get what you need
Yeah.
specifically.
Very good. Yeah. Episode 117, I interviewed Dr. Nathan Goodyear, and he
Mm.
does IV vitamin C and a lot of other things as well. So if you're interested in learning more about how to treat cancer naturally, that might be a good episode to check out, episode 117. So do you have any other low hanging fruit for the audience that they can implement quick and easy?
I think the quick and easy would be, to get somebody on your team. Um, like I said, have a whole team that are working together. Make sure you address everything, because those things that you don't address are what's going to come back around to haunt you. And like you said earlier, a lot of times it's that emotional component. So making
Yeah.
sure, you get somebody to help you with that, whether it's, somebody, marriage counselor or whatever you need, is really important.
Hmm. I know a lot about this. We don't have time to go in it, but one of the ways you can identify one of those toxic thoughts or unprocessed emotions is if there's an event that happens, if it happens to you, you kind of have a hair trigger. It kind of sends you off. It pushes your buttons, right? That's worth exploring. That's worth having a look under the hood, so to speak, because that's probably going to reveal something that you need to deal with on a mental, emotional level. So, I've got some tools for that, but we're running out of time today. But we'll cover that in another episode. So, Katrina, as we close out, I know you have a generous gift for the audience. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, I would love to give you all, anyone that's interested, my free ebook, The Roadmap to Prevent Cancer Recurrence. And I dive into there all the different areas that you want to check out and specific tests so that you have the tools to actually do that testing and what to look for.
Very good. And what's the website, or how do they get that?
Yeah, I'll give you the link, but it's cancerfreedom.com/roadmap opt in.
All right, very good. And I'll make sure to put that in the show notes as well. And if someone just wants to reach out to you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, cancerfreedom.com is my website. And I'm on Instagram at Katrina Foe, just my name.
Very good. Katrina, thank you for sharing your wisdom with the Natural Nation.
Thank you.
For this episode's resources and show notes, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/126. And don't forget that I'd love to get to know you better. If you'd like to have a one-on-one conversation with me, go to my website, davidsandstrom.com/coffee talk, all one word, and you can schedule a 10-minute Zoom call with me, pick a time and a date, and we'll chat for a few minutes. I would love to hear from you. That's it for now. Thank you for listening. I'll talk with you next time. Be blessed.